Welcome back to Right to Rise. I'm Leslie, I'm your host, and I have an amazing episode for you. Today it's just a short check in. I've got some incredible people on the lineup that we're going to be interviewing in the weeks to come. So stay tuned because we have some incredible creatives and writers and authors that are going to be popping by talking about their book journey, their writing process, and what that has done for their businesses and what that's done for their life. So stay tuned for some incredible hosts. But today I have had some really profound changes here recently, and I wanted to speak about that. So, 17 days ago, I had a soul reckoning. It was a moment that absolutely cracked me open and made me ask myself, are you living in alignment? Are you connected to the things that once fed your soul? And the truth is, I had stepped away from those things that feed me, those things that light me up and allow me to create from this full hearted space. And I realized that I had completely stepped away from the sacred, from my grounding practices, from the stillness, and from myself ultimately. And that realization was really, really hard for me to come to. I was, you know, experiencing some strange symptoms again. My body didn't feel good. My mind didn't feel good. I was sleepy. I wasn't creating. I was very blocked. And I just knew that something was massively wrong. And this last year, so much has changed. I opened my own boutique publishing house, Ho'ala Publishing. I created a program that helps writers become authors. I started sharing somatic writing practices here in my community in Hawaii and helping women move through their trauma, through learning how to move their body and move their narratives through their body and write a new one. And my partner and I just bought our first home here in Hawaii together and started a new chapter. And all of these things are incredible, and there's incredible abundance and expansion there. And I was getting exactly what I wanted. But as these pieces fell into place, I found myself being pulled in different directions and ultimately away from the practices that keep me rooted and grounded in creativity and in sobriety and in my heart-centered space. There was so much growth, so much joy, but somewhere in that expansion I just got stretched too thin. I let the noise get louder than my knowing. I quieted the inner intuition. And I started coping again. I started using alcohol again. It was a substance that I had come to a conscious relationship with and pulled out of my life for a very long time, but I started leaning on it again. And it was not just because of the substance itself, but I was craving stillness. I was craving silence. I was craving coming back home to myself again. And all of these things that had pulled me away had created chaos in my life again. And I realized that I was leaning on alcohol because I wanted a moment where my nervous system could breathe again, where I didn't feel the pressure to perform or produce. A lot of this actually came from hiring a coach that was not in alignment with my values, listening to that coach tell me things that I should be doing for my business to grow and expand, knowing that those things were wrong and that they didn't feel good for my business. And ultimately, I had to step away from that container and have some really tough conversations with that person, and not really even understanding how much of an effect that coaching experience had on me and my business. But slowly, that disconnection that was happening started to bleed into everything. I was moody again. I was tired. I was resentful. Even the things that I loved, like this purpose filled business that I have created, felt like a burden to me all of a sudden. And it started to hit me. I was letting that inner saboteur run the show again. And I knew I had to take my own medicine. I knew that I had to implement the practices that I teach every single one of my clients. So I started getting back to the golden hour, is what I love to call it, is, the first thing that I do before I even let my feet hit the ground is start running through mindset prompts and start diving into gratitude. And I take intentional time to journal anything that's in my head. I write it all out. I meet myself on the page. So I started writing, and it wasn't for content. It wasn't for social media. It wasn't for anyone else. It wasn't for a client. It wasn't for the clicks. It wasn't for the likes. It was for me. I had to meet myself back on the pages. And I know this to be powerful medicine. I moved my body again. I started cleaning up my diet. I started tending to my life and my business with more intention and really connect back to the things that feed me. And what has happened in these last 17 days is truly remarkable. I've reconnected back to my joy. I love every single one of the clients that are in my container right now. They're just incredible humans that are writing the most incredible books and doing soul-led, purposeful work in the world, especially at a time when it is just extreme chaos and we need those grounding forces now more than ever. My conversations have started to feel lighter. I start to see these beautiful changes that are actually happening in the chaos. And that neediness started to disappear. And I realized I was still healing from the wounds of that toxic coaching experience. This coach told me that books are dead, that nobody has time to read anymore, that nobody's really going to want to write a book. I'd probably do good if I made $10,000 a year. Long form content was outdated. People aren't reading books anymore. People aren't writing books anymore. That's not something that people want to do. And she told me that people's attention span to write or to read a book anymore was, they don't have it anymore. So I was listening to this coach who I eventually fired, but those things that she said were still in the back of my head. And I knew my intuition and the God of my understanding was leading me to this work. I show up on fire for my clients. I love to write. I love to read. And I knew that I was at least one person that loved long form content. And I knew that I was attracting people that wanted to talk about books. So what this coach was telling me was the opposite of everything that I was attracting. But that narrative was still in the back of my head, and that inner saboteur was getting the best of me. But then I started noticing in the days to come, the universe was giving me confirmation that I was on the right path. And last week, I walked into a Barnes and Noble with my partner. I've been working incredibly hard. I have a full client list with the Inspired Author Program where I walk people through from concept to execution how to write and publish their books. And I've also launched Ho'ala magazine, which is truly my passion project. And that is where I feature women and people in the community that are making an impact and really doing the soul work. And despite whatever is going on in the noise of the world, they are leading this holistic medicine revolution. And at Barnes and Noble, I realized this amazing thing that just absolutely blew me away. I walked in knowing I hadn't been in there in 6 months. 6 months ago, Barnes and Noble was actually thinking about going bankrupt and closing their doors. And, I typically like to go to small businesses, smaller bookstores, but I knew that the book that I was looking for, I had called around. The only place that had it was Barnes and Noble. And I still really love Barnes and Noble. I love a bookstore. So Carrie and I went on a date to Barnes and Noble, and I walked in and was absolutely floored. Every single chair was full. People were in the aisles, sitting on the floor reading. The checkout line was literally wrapped around the building. And I found myself not even being annoyed. I was just smiling from ear to ear and actually got a little bit emotional. People are buying books again. People are reading. They're craving slower mornings and deeper meaning. And that wasn't the only sign. Yesterday, I had a hair appointment across town, and I knew that it was going to be a busy day. Weekend, there's fresh markets everywhere here in Hawaii, and I knew parking was going to be a little bit of a nightmare. It's summer, kids are out, they're at the beaches, they're at the shops. So I left a little bit earlier so I could go to the local library, which is one of my favorite little sanctuaries here on island. Usually there's only one or two people in there. And the last time I was there buying a book, the lady was talking about being defunded and not getting funds for the library. They may have to shut down. They don't know. They're living in this uncertain space. But when I got there, the parking lot was absolutely packed, full of people, all ages. There were kids reading to each other. There were parents cuddled up with their little ones, reading to them. There were older people. There was a little old lady in there crocheting and watching her grandkids read books to each other. And I found my whole body just in actual tears. I was just floored. My heart softened in that moment. And I realized that these sanctuaries, these places that we thought were dying, there's a rebirth happening. So I took my book, I sat under a tree instead, reading in the breeze. And when I got to the hair salon, I noticed another thing. And this was just 3 stages of confirmation from the universe that I am in alignment. But every single client in that space was holding a book. They didn't have their phone, they didn't have anything else. They had their book in front of them as they were getting their hair done. And they're talking about the stories that had changed them, the books that had entertained them, the books that had led to healing or a perspective shift. And I was just sitting there thinking, 6 months ago, I was questioning this path. I was about to burn it all down and start over. I'm a nurse. I was going to go back to the hospital, even though I didn't want to do that. And I was letting other people tell me that my work was not valuable. And now I'm inspired again because now I know that my intuition was leading me back home. People are remembering, they're coming home. They're coming home to slowness. They're coming home to story, home to themselves. I also was reading recently, a new article just came out that long form content is actually more popular now than ever, and people are leaving Instagram, Facebook, TikTok in masses and leaning more into your Substack, which is long form content, or LinkedIn, which is more long form content. And people are craving more narrative. They want more connection. They don't want to be disconnected from their fellow man anymore. So if you've been feeling off, if you've drifted from the rituals that you once were rooted in, if you've never found your rituals, if you've been questioning whether your work still matters, whether your story is still needed, I just want to remind you it does. You are. It is. If you feel the pull to write a book and to finally birth that soul project, to share your story in a way that feels aligned and authentic, the Inspired Author Program is here. I do teach people how to write long form content, how to excavate those stories. It's not about being loud. It's about being true and authentic. It's about tapping back into your values. It's about balancing your nervous system. It's about creating and living in that creative space that you were meant to be in. It's about building a legacy through slow power, through words that rise from your soul. And maybe one day you'll walk into a bookstore or a library and see your book on the shelf and whisper, I did that. So thank you for being here. Thank you for remembering with me. If this episode touches something inside of you, I'd love to hear from you. Please share it. I'm the person behind the messages. I love connecting with my community. Remember, you are allowed to come home. If the chaos of the world and the noise around you is too loud, lean into those simpler things. Lean into a slower pace. Meet yourself on the pages. And when you're ready to write, I'll be here to guide you. Until next time, keep writing to rise.